I say AAA, activity absorbs anxiety. And I think if you love life, it will always love you back. So think about what steps would you take if you were brave, because sometimes it's maybe a little fear that's blocking us, but have some faith when you're open. And I'm not talking religious faith, but just faith that things will expand, because longevity. Kurt Madden was the original winner of Ultraman in 1983. That's on the Big Island. And he is still going. He won again 2 years later and then came back about 7 years ago and came seventh, and he's still racing.
Welcome everyone to Longevity Advantage. Our special host today is none other than Mr. Steve King. Steve is known around the world. I certainly know him, and a lot of my friends know him through the world of triathlon. He's traveled around the world with that, and he's the voice of triathlon. But he's, as many people will discover, he's bigger than that. So welcome, Steve. Great to have you on the program.
Thanks very much, Scott. Happy to be here.
Great. So when we think about sports, we don't always think about people maybe who are over 30 years of age or 35. You and I are clearly past that, but both remain active for many reasons. So maybe, Steve, you can give us a little bit of a introduction to, like, how did you find yourself in sport, maybe kind of from its earliest time?
Sure. Well, actually, I remember my very first day at school, and literally a teacher told us all to run. I can't remember how much it was, maybe 30, 40 meters, touch a fence and run back again. And we did that, and he told us to do it again. I was actually the first one to finish, and I think he thought I must have cheated, so he got us to do it again. And from that point on, I was in track and field, then into cross-country running. And one of the things that happened was when I was or had left school, I went to college, and we had to focus then on just a couple of sports, and that was badminton and trampolining. And I wasn't too much into either of those. So I ended up joining the Ilford Athletic Club, which was track and field club. And I did some running, but I also started race walking and did that for about 10 years and ended up really enjoying some distance race walking. And during the course of those years as well, I got into doing my first marathon, and it just moved from there until I moved literally to Canada, and specifically to Penticton here in British Columbia. At that point, there was no running clubs and no real races. There was one charity run that we had, but in 1981, I formed a running club that I'm glad to say is still going and celebrating its 40th year this year, and that was the Penticton Pounders. And as a result of doing so, it fell upon me to actually put some races on as well, so that I could run them. And that's how I got into announcing, because at that point, I was at the head of the field. And as soon as I'd finish, I'd grab a bullhorn and start calling in the races as well, and did the awards. And then after a while, people asked if I could do the same at their race if I wasn't racing. And then it moved into cross-country skiing and many other events since.
Well, I think it's nice that you've had such a variety of sports, and not really, say, I know that I know you through triathlon, but knowing you're into multiple communities, but still all with a common theme around obviously health and athletics. Mm-hmm. How did you did you find you ended up in endurance events like that kind of fit you, or did you just kind of go all over with short, middle, and long distance?
Well, I did whatever was happening, anywhere from, I think, the shortest races I used to do. We used to have 1 mile races, of course, but anything from a mile, 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon, 50 milers, 100 milers, 24-hour races. And the longest I've done in terms of nonstop time was the Badwater 135 miler or 216K, and that was 30 hours and 30 minutes it took me when I did that.
And how old were you when you did that?
Oh, I would have been, I think 52.
Yeah, 52. So you were no kid then, but that's certainly we see with endurance, right? It tends to attract a little older athlete than the shorter burst type events, right?
It does, but interestingly, you mentioned that, Scott, because just a little while ago, a friend of mine contacted me. He's going to do an interview with a young man who in 2011 did the Ultraman race in the UK. And this guy was out of Mexico. His name is Van Dan Sanchez, and he now puts on an Ultraman distance race in Mexico. And he was just 19 years of age. You may remember if you had done a marathon at 19 when we were sort of maybe in our teens or early 20s, people would have said you shouldn't be doing that, etc., etc. And yes, there have always been young kids who have done it, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, that sort of. In fact, Bruce Deacon, the great Canadian and Olympic marathoner, he did his first marathon at 12. But doing something like an Ultraman over 3 days at 19 years of age, and that is just outstanding. And then to take on just a few years later the idea of being a race director, and he does such a fantastic job with that as well. So again, you've got to have passion, you've got to have desire, and you've got to want to give back. And certainly he's one person who has done.
Yeah, and you can tell the people who are truly motivated by it, right? They just are so inspired that they want to give back, and they want to share that experience with others. It's just, and it's hard to describe, but I think you're doing a good job of getting that feel. So, how about on that note? Tell us about Ironman, I guess specifically Ironman Canada in Penticton, because I think that's one of the most, I kind of put the Ironman Penticton and Ironman in Lake Placid as the two kind of premier venues for Ironman events. And a lot of it is because of the town. So you obviously know more about Penticton's venue than anybody, obviously, because you live there. But how did it start in Penticton, and kind of what's it like as a community event?
Well, it began in 1983. In that year, I approached a couple of people, Mike and Lynn Van Aert and Frank Gear, with a friend of mine from our running club, Al Johnson. And the Van Aerts and Frank ran a place called The Base. It was a fitness center here in Penticton. And I suggested that Penticton would be an incredible site for a triathlon because they were starting to get quite popular, but we didn't have any in the Okanagan at that time. So we decided to go ahead with one in July. It became, at that point, it was the Peach Festival Triathlon, but it's now the Peach Classic. And we started off with just over 70 athletes, and 2 of whom are still racing to this day at the sport of triathlon. And that was a fantastic event, went very successfully. We realized that we could do more. But interestingly, around the same time, Kelowna was hosting an event the next month as well, their very first, the Apple Triathlon. And there was a gentleman from Vancouver, Ron Zalco. He owns a fitness center there. He came up to the Okanagan and he wanted to put on an Ironman distance race. So he approached Lynn and Mike Van Aert as well and asked about doing that. And so we were all sort of semi-involved with that. And they got 24 athletes to sign up for the event, and that was the very first year, 1983. We couldn't call it the Ironman because we didn't have a license then, so they called it the Canadian International Ultra. In fact, they made shirts up initially that said Ironman on them. We had to put a line through that and put Iron Person in there. But these are keepers. They were $2 shirts, but mine's still, I can't get it on these days, but I still got it. But that morning of the event, I had sort of planned to go out with some fellow runners and be at certain locations to support the event as best I could and support the athletes, of course. And then a little while before the start, Lynn approached me about being the race announcer for the event for the day. And I was a little anxious about that because I'd made other plans, and plus I really didn't know the athletes at that point. But I said yes, and we went ahead, and it was a fantastic 17 hours. And the benchmark was set 10 hours, 41 minutes, right through to near the 17-hour mark for the final persons to come in. So it was wonderful and thrilling. And then the next year, because it was so good, and I decided to buy a bike. I got that in May, and it was the bike that the women's winner, the only female that took part in that first year in 83, that she had used. She had borrowed it from the bike barn. So I went to them, bought the bike, $500 and got myself a bike that had been around the course, and looked up to people like Mike Wagstaff, who won that first year as the top male, and got into the event, ended up in 6th position, and I've done it 3 times since then. But the rest of the years I've been announcing, if not there at the start and finish line, out there on the course.
I've often wondered, tell me what it's like in terms of how do you, I guess in terms of prep ahead of time, but also on the day. I've often wondered, like, just give us a sense as well as what's the day like, because I just, you've obviously got to plan that out.
Yeah, well, one of the great things is over the years, my wife and I have hosted a party here the night beforehand, and we know it's going to be a long, long day, but we loved it, and we love the social life. So we usually would stay up and play music or make music till about 10:30, go to bed, get maybe 3 hours sleep, get down there about 4 o'clock in the morning, and get prepared and ready, make sure everything's set up to go. And then about an hour before the start, I just start talking, trying to calm everyone down as much as possible, because a lot of people were getting anxious, certainly those that were doing the event for the very first time.
And it's still dark at this hour, right?
Oh, it's still dark at that time. Absolutely, yeah. And so beforehand, there's a big difference between how we used to do it and how we do it now. I used to get scraps of paper and try and find out what I could from the individual athletes, who their partners are, what they do for a job, what races they've done, if they were specialists in one of the disciplines or not, how many triathlons they've done, what their best performances were. And that worked out very well. But I had a fantastic team that would work with me, because as the numbers rose, certainly in the late 80s when we started to get over 1,000, and you've got people who are coming and going from transitions as well, I would have half a dozen guys spotting with their binoculars for me to see the numbers. And I had my sheets made out. I had like 12 feet of sheets with all their names and numbers and everything. And so they would hold a finger on the name, and I'd run back and forth giving information on who's coming in and who's going out. But then things changed when we started to get it computerized, thank goodness, and timing chips and everything changed everything. So when they went over timing mats or came around a corner, it was much easier for us to do the job. It wasn't quite as physical, because we would go through, of course, to the 17 hours, but on a number of occasions, we would go well beyond that. When you think of Rick and Dick Hoyt, the father and son, that were there with us in 1986. We went well beyond.
Maybe just tell people who Rick and Dick are, if they don't know.
Well, Dick is the father, Rick is the son. And in 1986, they had decided they wanted to do it together, but Rick has cerebral palsy, or cystic fibrosis, sorry, and was in a chair, so he could not swim, he could not bike, he could not run. So what it meant was his father had him in a bit of a dinghy and tied to him and did the swim in that. Then a special seat placed on the front of his bike, and his son was placed in that. And then on the run, the father ran with Rick, pushing him in a chair. And I tell you, what an effort it was, absolutely stunning. And so when they finished, I think it was around 18 and a half hours, there were still hundreds of people there. It was an incredible sight to see them just hammering up the finish line. And since then, they've become very well known, because they've raced around the world, raced away, literally raced and cycled across the US. So the man has done amazing things, and his son, of course, has completed college and had incredible experiences himself. And they've been featured on ABC, the TV, the American TV, on a number of occasions.
I guess I focus on Ironman because it has so much more to it than just the race. Right? We've talked about before that the beautiful thing about endurance is it's a real test of, do you love the sport versus do you love competing? Because you don't get to do too many Ironmans in the course of a year. A lot of people will only attempt one. A few amateurs will do more than one. And pros will certainly do more, but it's just it's a grueling sport, but it has so many great stories. So you mentioned Rick and Dick Hoyt, maybe some other stories, particularly again at Ironman Canada. I think of Sister Madonna Buter, right? Maybe you can tell kind of as one of the staples of that race. That's just an amazing story.
Well, it is. Sister Madonna Buddha still living in Spokane, Washington. She is a nun, and she's now 90 years of age. But when she was in the 55 to 59 category, she did her first Ironman distance race, and then came back for many, many years and blew away each division that she was into, right up until the 80 to 84 division. Because at 82 years of age, she became the most senior female ever to finish an Ironman. She did that here in Penticton, 2012, finishing with a time of 16 hours, 32 minutes. So amazing stuff. She's won many world titles, not just at Ironman, but at Olympic distance as well.
Yeah, I always go back and remember when I watched the ABC coverage at Kona, and it was really these older athletes, watching them, that was what inspired me. So, I was in my early 40s at that time and thinking, I don't have any excuse. This is quite a challenge, and okay, I can ride a bike a little bit, but maybe I can get to run and the swimming. Well, of course I know how to swim, until I jumped in a pool and discovered that swimming as a kid and swimming a couple of miles was a very different experience. But it was on that particular note, I'll say it potentially saved my life once in a boating incident. I was in the fall in Ontario on a lake, no one else out, and they got caught in heavy winds in a canoe and ended up capsizing. But I remember thinking that from that moment of when I knew it was going over and I was in the water, thinking, thank goodness I had all that triathlon swimming behind me, because had I not done that, I would have clearly been in a different mode. And it was very, very calm to say, well, I know I can drag a canoe, or I can swim there was an island out in the middle, and get organized. So yeah, there's so many things that people don't realize that come with being involved in sport over a long period of time. So I'm looking at you there, and you obviously have sport around you. That's your bike in the background, I'm guessing.
It is. That's a Cyclops. That's an interesting bike, because Mike Mulholland sadly is no longer with us, but he used to live out in Vernon, and he built that bike and he loaned it to me for the 1994 Ultraman Canada race. And I was so pleased with it that I asked him if I could therefore buy it off him afterwards. And it was the sort of bike that Joanne Ritchie used to ride in our national championships as well. And so it's got the soft ride beam on it. And I think when you found a piece of equipment that truly works for you and you're pleased with, why give it away or get rid of it? I know people buy lots of modern gear and want to start with the latest stuff, but some of the latest stuff, you can be looking at $20,000 now for some of the bikes that are out there. And for me, saving or going 5 minutes faster on the bike course, it doesn't mean that much. It's, to me now, although it used to be about that, now it's about the experience, because to me, it's about the time you have, getting the time that you get.
Yeah, you have lots of time. So maybe we've talked about it like everyone knows what Ironman and Ultraman are. So maybe you can just kind of run us through the distance between, say, Olympic or sprint, which is where a lot of people start, and Olympic, right through to Ultraman, just to give people a gauge of just what sort of feats we're talking about.
But when you look at sprint, you're usually looking at 750 meters, 20 on the swim, 20 kilometers on the bike, and then 5 kilometers on the run. And it's double that distance for the Olympic or standard distance. Then you've got the half iron or 70.3 distances. And then, of course, you've got the Ironman distances, which are 180K bike after the 4 kilometer or 3.8 kilometer swim. And then you've got 42.2 kilometer marathon run to wrap it up with. When it comes to Ultraman, on day one, you've got a 10 kilometer swim, followed by a 90-mile bike. And I say miles because it's on the big island of Hawaii, and the Americans use miles. Then it's 171 miles on day two, and then followed by a double marathon, 52.4 miles on day three.
Yeah, most people have a hard time imagining running a single marathon as a standalone event, let alone doing a double on day three. It's staggering. And so you have completed Ultraman, you're saying, right?
Yes, 1994. I was fortunate enough to come second behind the great Australian Nick Mallet. He was a two-time winner here.
So it does give an idea of the international flavor of sport, which I think is great too, because we see people coming from all over the world. You've obviously seen, people from all over the world coming to Penticton. I'm just trying to think of some of the bigger names who would have come and raced at Ironman Canada.
Well,
did Crowe ever come to Penticton?
No, not Crowe, but we had some of the big four, of course. Dave Scott, in fact, was here in '86, but never raced. But we did see great battles. Scott Tinley, he's been first, second, third, fourth, and 14th in the times he's come here. We had the battle with Ray Browning, Scott Molina, who won the Ironman World title in 1988. And then Scott Tinley. Between them, there was just 90 seconds the year that those guys raced. But we've had a closer race. Chucky V beat out Shingo Tani and Brian Rhodes, and there was only 40 seconds separated them one year. So those are the closest finishes we've ever seen. Just amazing. So we've definitely had some big names here. Paula Newby-Fraser, Erin Baker, what a battle they had. When Paula Newby-Fraser was here, she left the marathon onto the marathon. She was 11 minutes plus up on Erin Baker. And Erin Baker went out of what people thought was a suicidal pace on the run, but she caught Paula about 9 miles into the run and comfortably beat her. And the time that Erin recorded for the marathon was 2:49, a world best. The only person who went faster than her on that day was in the men's division, and it happened to be her husband, Scott Molina, who did a 2:47.
Yeah, it's a the numbers are staggering. I always, my lesson was it was just that was Simon Whitfield, and I remember it was up at a weekend up in Ontario, and we're going to the track after and trying to do Simon's times just for a 400-meter race, and that was when I realized just how fast these people really are. It was I could do his pace, I don't know, a couple hundred meters or something. Of course, he's already done the swim and the bike before he's doing that, and that was and going out for the 10K. It's pretty staggering what people can do at that level. But I kind of come back and say it's really pretty amazing what people like you and I and all of the average people around us can do if we really kind of want to set a goal out, right? And you've obviously inspired many people over the many years you've given to try. And so how do people get into sport in terms of, from your experience? You've obviously seen this for so long now, all sorts of ways to come into sport, right?
Totally. And things have changed a lot. It used to be in the 60s, 70s that you could go to a marathon and there may or may not have been aid stations. My first marathons, there were no aid stations. And there was an expectation that you would finish inside 3.5 hours because volunteers and everyone would shut down and leave by then. And I remember my first marathon, I did 2:41 and I was like 72nd, and it was not a major city marathon by any means. However, thank goodness things changed and it wasn't considered macho to take aid any longer, and they started to provide aid stations. And running stores then set up running clinics, and more clubs got organized. We also saw when it came to in fact, probably the mid-90s, that more and more people were turning to coaches, whereas a lot of people didn't have coaches before. They were just doing it by themselves. But then with the advent of the knowledge that some of the coaches, who most were great athletes as well in their own time, that they were able to apply their learning and put it into coaching, and many people could see that this person's been there, done that, and look who they're coaching now. And then you've got people like Team in Training and other groups that were more like charitable groups that were saying, look, we can take anybody and help them become a triathlete, no matter if you've had no experience before. Just like the park runs and things where now, anyone can go and do a 5K, you can walk it, you can jog it, you can race it, you can do what you want. And so I think the ability now, because of the sheer volume of races and the different types of races or events, are out there for people to get involved and not feel intimidated, because certainly if today we were still expecting everyone to finish inside 3.5 hours, there would be millions of people who wouldn't be keeping fit in the ways that they are today.
Yeah, it is I think a beautiful thing in so many sports. It is all about participation and how much encouragement you get from other competitors, from everyone on the sideline. It's hard to describe how strong that feeling is until you go there, and that, I think, for a lot of people, while getting to the finish line is obviously, and they get the photo, and that's important. They've had some vision of what that might be, but I think it's just being around that inspiring crowd of thousands of people at whatever the event is what keeps a lot of people coming back, because it is so different than what daily life is. You and I sitting in a computer compared to what those moments are. And as I'm sure we'll have events coming back, hopefully before too long.
Well, a lot of people are waiting for that, obviously, because there's a lot of distress that's happening right now for different reasons, and people are stressed out about their work, about their finances, about their social life or lack thereof, or not connecting with family and friends in the same way. So thank goodness we can still get out and about or utilize facilities. A lot of people have treadmills or wind trainers in their own home these days, so it keeps the chemistry moving around and helps you feel a lot better. It's a great de-stressor, and certainly I think we need that. It's also a great motivator, as you said. It's like you find your tribe, you find maybe a pursuit that you're particularly interested in, or a particular event, something you may not have tried before. Obviously, we have those events that are sort of rote for us, and we go back year after year. But there's some events that are like highlight events for us that we say maybe one of those days, or that's what I'm inevitably aiming towards, or hopefully going to end up completing by the time I decide to step down a little from the apex of my career, whatever that career may be, because some people peak at 35, others make it a lifetime or lifestyle, and others say, well, I've got 4 kids now and I really can't find the time. That's one of the things that always amazes me, is the number of people who do have children and are great parents and great partners, but they still find the time. As they say, if you want something done, find a busy person.
Couldn't agree more. It's amazing how they do it. I remember in my own training when I was doing, when you get up doing more than 20 hours a week and you're trying to work full time, there just aren't a lot of hours left in the week. Right? That's training time, not travel time to get there. These things can be all consuming, which I think for some people that is their life, but at the same time, you don't need to commit anywhere near that level to really get the most out of it.
And you don't have to have the equipment the same as some of the pros. I remember, I think I've mentioned to you once before about this gentleman who came and raced with us a couple of times at the iron distance. And this was in the 80s as well. His name was Hart Akerson. And that's Heart, which I thought was a real neat name. And this gentleman turned up, and he signed up almost like the day before. There was a time when you could actually do that. And he turned up. He's wearing cut-off jeans, no shoes, and a bit of a T-shirt. And we thought he was going to get changed to go in the swim and on the bike and everything. Nope. He actually had those pedals with the jagged edges as well. So he swam in that gear, he biked in that gear, and he ran in that gear and ran barefoot as well as cycled barefoot. He looked like a hippie, long beard, long hair. And one of the amazing things was he had 7 children. So his wife and 7 children were here with him. And we all wondered about this guy, what does he do? How's he manage and everything? And we found out quite a bit more about him, because at the awards, we're all lined up to go in for the food, etc. And there he is with his wife and kids all sitting around a piano, and he's playing absolutely beautifully. And we find out that he's been an inventor, and he invented these medical gadgets that are used throughout the world, and he's made a mint for himself, and I believe lives in Costa Rica by the beach now, but he's still around. And We saw him twice here, and we were just thrilled he was part of the action. And you talked about the difficulty of swimming earlier, you know, when you haven't got much experience. So imagine swimming with a few extra pounds on your head, because you may remember Cowman Amuha, as he goes by. His name's Ken, but everyone knows him as Cowman. He's done the Ironman many times on the Big Island. That's where he lives. And he's done Ultraman there a number of times as well. Well, he came here in 1986 and did our Ironman and came back a couple of years after that as well. So you've got some great characters that have been part of this, that are there for the experience and there to embrace the community. Because well, the other thing you mentioned was about how the community gets involved. When we had 3,000 athletes doing this event, a few times we've had those sort of numbers, we had an Iron Army of 4,500 volunteers. That's what makes it all run smoothly.
Yeah, that was 3,000. You said you've had a couple of times.
3,200 was the
Wow.
highest number we ever had. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I did it in 2007, I guess, the 25th, and I think I don't know. I think it was around 2,500 or so. But yeah, it's a it's another experience with that many people in the water all at once. But it's such a great venue. I mean, it's such a the venue that you have there is really second to none. Even, you know, I say Lake Placid is a great venue, but it's the community part that strikes me, not the course. I mean, I think it's a great course. It's got a tremendous downhill. It's probably one of the fastest downhills of any course around the world, which is more than what a lot of people would like. That isn't necessarily a plus for people. But yeah, it's so I wanted to go back and ask you a little bit, because there's another part of your life which is around you work as a counselor, an addiction counselor, and I think it's particularly relevant given you alluded to kind of that 2020 in particular, but as we're now in 2021 and the impact that COVID has had. But and so we've all heard things about it, but you obviously have seen that firsthand. What's your take on kind of the challenges with addiction as you've seen over your career, but also probably, I assume things are even a much bigger issue today?
I would agree with you. Yeah, we're seeing huge numbers coming through our office. I work for a non-profit. I've been a counsellor there since 1989. I do not have lived experience, so I can't say I know exactly what people are going through. I don't. I know what they tell me, but I tend to specialize in traumas. In other words, I help people process traumas, but obviously we work on getting a plan for them, because when you think of alcohol and drugs, for those people who are having difficulty with it, it has usually cost them terribly in terms of finances, relationships, legal matters, or work situations. So in effect, they're in a state of bondage to booze and to drugs, or slavery. It's like that's a dictator in their head. And so people talk about an addictive voice and the struggles that they go through. And like any community, we have quite a few homeless people here. We have a lot of mental health issues people are struggling with all over the world, and therefore COVID certainly adds to that. And so there's a whole slew of different reasons that people use. We use what we call a biopsychosocial spiritual model, which means people could use for pain and use for pleasure. So you've got emotional, physical pain, but you've also got the pleasure aspect over there, which is usually more for those that are into recreational use. So we see a lot of clients. I see probably 6 to 7 a day for 1 hour sessions, but then we do a lot of groups. We do Zoom as well as obviously in the office. I'm not sure where things are going to go with us. You know, we're hoping we can remain and continue. We've been around for 45 years, but there's lots of changes going on. And I love my job. I mean, a lot of people said, why are you still doing it? Well, I find clients fascinating, interesting. I care for them and seem to get along quite well with the majority of them. And our role is to support the clients with whatever their goals are. So someone may not come in and say, I want to quit totally, but they're saying, you know, I'm having a struggle with it. I'd like to cut back a bit, or I want better health. So we certainly discuss all aspects, including nutrition, including exercise. So it's a good connection for me. So we're not there as sponsors for someone, but certainly we support them if they want to go to AA, NA, or any other program. We do have a methadone program in our office as well, and we put on lots of groups. We put on groups also for codependency, for people who are substance affected in many ways. So we see people as individuals, as couples if they want their partner there, and as families if the family wants to come in as well.
You know, as you were talking, I hadn't ever quite made the same connection, but it's when we look at trying to provide information to people around lifestyle choices that get them to a better health state. The hardest part is the same with addiction, I think, is that getting to the point of saying, I want to change and I'm going to commit to change.
Yes.
That's you have obviously seen that on a large scale, and for most people that's that's the hardest part, and unfortunately they get to the point of being desperate, or whatever that situation might be. But boy, if you would, I'm sure with probably everyone who's walked in your door, you would wish you could have got to them earlier, right?
Yes, certainly. But what we do is compliment them for coming in the first place, because it often provokes a lot of anxiety for someone to be willing to hopefully carefront their own issues and talk about them. But one of the things, I'm pleased you mentioned the word commitment, because there is a great therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And what I do often is get someone to talk about their set of values and personal goals. And then you see, if you are willing to accept you've got this issue and you're willing to note, because I give them a form which tells them a lot more about it, of course, but I get them to sort of itemize their most important values and most important goals. And then you see, if you look at inside committing yourself to the fact that you can, anytime you're faced with a question which requires some sort of answer or possible commitment from you, you can very easily say to yourself, would that send me towards or away from my values and goals? And if you've committed yourself to only doing things or taking action steps that actually send you towards your goals, it becomes easy with that level of commitment to know what to do.
That's really good advice. I like that. And it's because that's what things that work are simple, right? They're really easy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very clear, and kind of ask that question. And then of course it makes it easier to develop the new habit.
Absolutely.
Because you don't have to process the question every time you have this situation, right?
Right. There's a lot of people who have grown up in families where there was chaos and crisis all around them. And so they will often go molehill mountain climbing, so to speak. So we try and facilitate shifting attitude as well to realize, or help people realize, you're cordially invited to change your mind. Look through the lens of 2021 as opposed to maybe 1960 or something. And that can be very helpful, because, I have a saying on the board in my office as well for people to look at, and often people will see that and they'll go, I can relate to that, which is, alcohol gave me wings to fly, but then it took away the sky. Many of my clients are extremely sensitive people. That's one of the reasons I really enjoy working with them, is it's because they're so sensitive. They're empathic to the world. Many of them are great artists, musicians, painters, etc. But they've been wounded. And as Einstein said, there is only one question: is the universe safe? Well, certainly for many people growing up, maybe with traumatic incidents around them, or less than a major welcoming to the world, or bullying at school, there can be a whole host of things. But it certainly doesn't help in this day and age with COVID sitting there as well, making it tougher on people. And people dealing with a lot more loneliness. So finding our tribe is really important, because it doesn't mean we have one tribe. We can have lots of them. So where are your fascinations? Where are your interests? And so when we talk sport, if you're into triathlon, you're automatically into swimming, biking, and running. And each of those can provide many different events that can make you enthusiastic on their own. Look at the different types of swimming there are. Lots of people are doing cold water swimming now, ocean swimming, distance swimming, as well as short course and long course in the pool. Others are doing water polo, right? Look at all the biking that is out there. You've got fat tire as well as e-bike races as well now going on, right?
I hadn't heard of e-bike races.
We've had one here. We put on a great mountain bike race in Summerland, and we've had an e-bike category. So there's going to be more and more of that stuff coming up.
Great. So I can really turn up the wattage on my e-bike then. Is there a horsepower limit on it? Oh, the open category. I'm thinking of open wheel racing with the open division. That's pretty good. So as you're talking there again, what I was thinking was, particularly, and it's not just COVID, but COVID had just magnified so many things. What I think people don't, or maybe forget, is there's a lot of more walking wounded today now than there ever have been, right? We've seen the epidemic around overweight and obesity, the rise in diabetes. There are so many of us that are wounded that really just need to get on a different path. And it's not to say it's just you need to choose to. These are real challenges, real life challenges, right? And so for maybe those people, I would think a lot of your training would apply to anybody, right? If I came to you and said, I'd like to do this, but I've never done anything. I'm 55 years old. I've never done anything. I couldn't possibly. What should I do, Steve?
Right. And so I would discuss with somebody, tell me about your sleeping and your eating habits, those sorts of things initially. What's possible for you? Let's focus on what you can do, not on what you can't do at this point. The main point is to get something going. And for some people, it may be watching something on YouTube, how to, if they can't afford a coach. If they can afford a coach, great. Can you go to the local store? Is there someone putting a program together out of a store? Because you and I both know online, there's hundreds of different programs out there. I don't mind talking to people about anything and everything related to their health and well-being. So if someone asks me something specific, I've had quite a few people over the years who tell me they want to do Ironman, and I try and say, well, maybe we should start with something else first, because you don't want it to turn into another stressful thing, because some people think they've got to train every day or overtrain and do damage initially, or they have a negative experience. And I'd rather they had some real pleasant feedback, from getting to know other people, getting to know other events, experiencing that training is a lifestyle thing. It's not burning yourself out every time you get out onto a course, because it can become stressful. We know there's plenty of eating disorders. We see people with quite a few eating disorders as a result. So it's like, how do you become balanced? How do we learn to surf through life and all the vagaries that come with it, all the stressors that may come with that as well?
I like your mention there of surfing, and it's I talk about it in terms of learning to swim with the current, right? And we think when we're following the crowd, we're following the current, until you start to realize a new balance and realize, no, you're just caught up with everybody swimming against the current, and you didn't realize it. And once you get some new balance, it really gets it can be so much easier. So in terms of starting, like any limit of when, like whether I'm 40 or 50 or 60 or 70, like it sounds like you started with doing speed walking early, right? Like you don't have to have the goal of doing a 2:40 marathon at any point in your life.
No, I mean, the reason I started race walking was because I was 17 and I began my career on the London Stock Exchange, and they had an athletic club, and the biggest event that they put on, and everyone on the stock exchange knew about it, was a race called the London to Brighton, 52, 53 miles and race walking. And it had a long history. But in order to be able to do that race, you had to finish a 7-miler, then you had to do a 25-miler, then you were allowed to enter the event. Well, I had a friend who was on the same cross-country team with me at school. He was a year older. His name was Roger Mills, and he belonged to the Ilford Athletic Club that I mentioned to you. And he was a race walker. And he, in fact, at one point set a world record for the mile, going in 6.5 minutes. Now that record's blown apart, but he got third in the European Games in the 20-kilometer race walk at one time as well. So he was a fantastic race walker. And so I thought, well, he's the person I need to connect with. So I phoned him up. I hadn't spoken to him for a couple of years since leaving school. He said, yeah, come on down. I'll show you and we'll start your race walking. And that's where it began. So the first time I did the walk, I had to stop at 40 miles because I still hadn't seen my crew once. They were meant to be following me in a vehicle, but they kept seeing other people behind me suffering. So they kept stopping to help other people. And I ran out of gas at 40 miles. The next time I did it, I came 8th, and then I came 3rd, and then twice I came 2nd. So I never got to win it, but I was happy with my times because they progressively got better.
Yeah, as you're talking there, I'm remembering, and I mentioned before that was coached by Gorda Byrne, who's a champion there as well. And a comment, he coached me for Coeur d'Alene. And I remember a comment he made that just stuck with me. And it was one of those comments that I think he makes routinely. And it was a question of, so what will be different whether you win or lose your age group, right? On when you go out. And in almost all cases, nothing. Right? We're amateurs. Right?
True, but you know as well as I do, Gordo's coming from a place where he won the World Ultraman Championships, and he put on those great epic camps with Scott Molina. And fascinating, I mean, Scott Molina, when he was 24 years of age in 1984, he won the World Ultraman Championships as well, and that was only the second year it had been held. And here's another interesting thing about that, longevity. Kurt Madden was the original winner of Ultraman in 1983. That's on the Big Island. And he is still going. He won again 2 years later and then came back about 7 years ago and came 7th. And he's still racing. And the lady who won in 1983 and won again in 1985, Ardis Bowe, she, along with her friend Sally Edwards, came to our race in 1986, and they came jointly 2nd overall. She still goes to the Ultraman World Championships every year to volunteer. So that's a sort of tribe that the sport can bring out, whether it be at shorter distances or right up to Ultraman World Championships.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Whatever our tribes are, compared to being at home alone, right? There's just so much to be gained when you get around a healthy community of people that just want to pull you in, because that's what these tribes feast on. That's what they're there for, right? Is to bring people in. And so yeah, you can find them online in terms of who's in your community, what groups there are. I remember when I was moving to Calgary in 2006. So as soon as I knew I was moving, I started to get online to find out, okay, what are the triathlon clubs in Calgary? I already knew who I was going to, okay, so when you come, meet us Saturday morning at this coffee shop, and I'm remain friends to them with those folks to this day. And there's so much about trying to build your community of people around you. And that's really how you succeed in all sorts of ways that you won't anticipate, right? That have really nothing to do with sports. Sport's the excuse for people to get together and be social.
Well, and you know as well as I do that Calgary has hosted some great events. The National Triathlon Championships, Ironman 70.3 has been there, and they have a great Calgary Stampede Marathon as well. So
yeah, I did all those when I was living there. Yeah, it was that's a fast 70.3 race because it's a little it's got a little bit of downhill from the lake into town, but yeah, that's a course I would train on running anyway. You could run the reservoir. I think I've done the longest run of my life, running that reservoir twice one day. So yeah. Well, thanks, Steve. This has just been great. I appreciate your wisdom. You have contributed so much, but you've learned so much, and you've just continued to give back to people. Maybe what would you give some thoughts to people? Kind of, you're such a great counselor in life. Maybe some thoughts, parting thoughts to leave with folks.
Sure. Well, I would suggest to people that there's always one thing, whether it's before a race or before anything that you do, but even at the very beginning of your day, that you have some control over, and that is your attitude. Your attitude determines your experience of anything and everything, including us going through COVID and what lies ahead of us. None of us know, but we can sort of think it through in terms of how do we want to be given that. And I think I've mentioned to you before, if you take the word attitude and you say the A is letter 1 of the alphabet and T is 20, and you add that up, you'll get 100. So that's why I say it's 100% related to your experience of anything. I would say please remain fascinated with life, motivated, keen, passionate, curious. These are things that give us a long life. And instead of AA, when we're reflecting on Alcoholics Anonymous, I say AAA, activity absorbs anxiety. And I think if you love life, it will always love you back. So think about what steps would you take if you were brave, because sometimes it's maybe a little fear that's blocking us, but have some faith when you're open. And I'm not talking religious faith, but just faith that things will expand, because I think it was Paulo Coelho who wrote The Alchemist, who said an enthusiastic heart finds opportunities everywhere. And I hope you find opportunities, as we've certainly been fortunate enough to do.
Yeah, that's great advice. That the worst thing that happens is you learn something.
Absolutely. Right? And so focus on what you can do, not on what you can't do. And in the end, effectiveness is the measure of truth.
Yep. And if you stumble a couple of times, I would say for me, those are the things, whether it was golf or whatever it was, that's what kept me coming back, because I wanted to win it. Win is in terms of achieve whatever that challenge was, just because you don't get over the first time, right?
Right. Well, as someone once said to me, a friend of mine, I don't know where he got it from, but he said, even if you fall flat on your face, at least you're still moving forward. So let's hope it's not that way, but you've got to be aware life's full of wonderful opportunities and possibilities.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, great to talk with you again, Steve. Thanks for all you have done and continue to do. You're an inspiring man for all of us in all sorts of ways. We absolutely appreciate and love you for what you do. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. Really appreciate it.